Choice Hotels get you more of what you value. Here's a little tune to help you remember. Same drive, different day. Don't you wish you were getting away? Pack your bags and come on through. Texas, Ohio, Alaska, we're up there too. Comfort Inn, it's calling your name. Save on the stay. Oh, and free waffles are yours to claim. Well, I hope you like my little song. Book direct at choicehotels.com.
Hi, and welcome to Kay Let's Talk, the podcast where we break down storytelling across books, television, and film with a special love for book-to-screen adaptations. Here, we talk about craft, character arcs, structure, dialogue, visual language, and the creative choices that shape how a story lands. If you like thoughtful conversational deep dives into the stories you can't stop thinking about, you're in the right place. Let's talk. This will be my Outlander Season 8, Episode 9 review titled Pharos. As always, if you are looking to avoid spoilers from the book or the TV show, you have been warned. So the episode opens with Lord John, who is waking up after being hit in the head with blood on his fingers, visibly confused about his surroundings, and we see that he's shackled when he looks up and meets the eyes of Captain Richardson. Richardson says he would have handled this without involving John if he could have, and that there's no hard feelings, and John presses him to find out what exactly he's after and why he's involving his family. Richardson asks John if he's familiar with a man named Neil Stapleton, which if you've read any of the Lord John novellas, you will have recognized this name, and I highly encourage anyone who loves Lord John to take the time to read those novellas because I think they're wonderful. John admits he may have heard the name, but it's been some time, and Richardson knows that John knew him carnally and shows him letters which depict what happened between the two of them. And John makes the argument that a sane man would have never written those letters. Richardson then heavily implies that the man is dead, but then doubles back and says he's alive in London, and he has additional testimony by way of Percy. And that's when Percy comes in and apologizes for not being brave, and his confession was forced out of him, which incriminates John for incest as well as sodomy. John then says a gentleman does not submit to blackmail and asks why exactly he's doing this. And that's when Richardson starts to explain the book canon, which is that he has a list of names of people who will have a direct impact on the outcome of the war, and Hal Grey is one of them. Hal intends to give a speech at the House of Lords recommending that they withdraw funds from the war, and Richardson knows that if they do that, the British will lose the war and the American colonies will win. So he wants John to convince Hal not to give that speech and deliver a different one that would keep the war funds going. In the book, Richardson also makes a point to bring up that he is a time traveler to John himself and asks John whether or not he knew that Claire is a time traveler as well. Richardson believed Claire would have told John that at some point, given that they were married, and calls Claire the most intemperate woman he's ever met in this century or any other. He also tells John that he knows that her daughter and grandchildren are as well. And John doesn't understand what he means because Richardson is very vague, and that's when he tells him that they are all people capable of moving from one period of time to another. In the book, Richardson is almost annoyed when John doesn't believe him and starts to tell him about the abolitionist movement. And we see that later in the show, how they gave this conversation to Richardson and Claire instead of Richardson and John. But in the show, he explains that if Hal were to deny his request, then Richardson will leak the documents, and it would hurt Hal's reputation, but it would also mean that John would be hanged for sodomy. So John's fate is in Hal's hands, essentially, and he is to be kept locked away there until Hal submits to Richardson. And so John, we can see, finds a nail after he hits the wall in frustration, and that's when he starts to hatch himself a plan to escape. In the night, we see two men who are guarding John, drinking, and John looks out over the water and we can see that there's a lighthouse. So he pulls off his ring and starts to carve something into his signet ring. And this is visual foreshadowing to the payoff later on with his rescue. Over in the march, we can see time passing, and John is met by Percy again, who enters into his cell, and he asks John to believe him when he says that he would release him if he could. But Richardson has sent him once again to try and persuade Hal not to give the speech. And Percy doesn't want John to die, and John, in a very humorous way, agrees that he also doesn't want to die, but admits that it does not mean he will be able to convince Hal. And that's when Percy apologizes again, and John doesn't believe that he's sorry. Despite that claim, Percy then admits that he loves John, and we can see that that admission hits John like a ton of bricks. He says that he had hoped Percy would come to say goodbye, but only because Richardson hadn't allowed him to write to anyone. So if Percy actually ever had any love for him at all, he asks him to go to his house, find William, and tell him that John loves him. And so as his final act, he agrees, and that's when we see John give Percy his signet ring because it should be William's. And that's how we know that there's now a plan in place, because we just saw him carve something into that ring. John then says goodbye to Severance, live up to your name. And that's a show-only addition to the line that I actually really loved, because in the book, John doesn't even give him the ring. We get to the opening credits and the title card Pharos with a shot of the lighthouse where John is being held. And then we cut to Claire talking over the scene, saying, I once believed time could be shaped with sheer force of will, like water wearing away stone. But with Jamie's fate seemingly carved into history's bedrock, I found myself searching for any crack, any fissure through which hope might seep. And then we get these shots of Jamie, Claire, and William riding on horseback together and coming up on Lord John's house in Savannah. Amaranthus opens the door, and we get a timestamp for William's dialogue that it's been 7 weeks and there has not been any word from John. So we know that John's been gone for quite some time at this point, and Hal also has not arrived and has been delayed somehow, and no signs point to John having planned this absence. So Amaranthus says that there was a very sad man who delivered a letter for the Duke of Pardlow and had a separate message for William as well, and wouldn't tell Amaranthus the message or his name, but said that he had to relay the message to William in person. In the book, Percy does meet William at the house, and they speak in person with Amaranthus there, and that's the first time William ever sees or learns of Percy in the book, not catching him and John in the act, and that's when Percy tells William that he is John's stepbrother. In the book, Percy tells William John is on a ship, but they move the ship every night, and they were lifting anchor as he left, and the ship's name was Palais, which is Greek for the god of battle. And that's when Percy also tells him that John had been kidnapped and was in the hands of a madman named Richardson, which makes William furious. Percy then tells him about the plot with Hal, whereas in the show, we see that William arrives with Claire and Jamie, and they read a letter, and inside find a note from Richardson, which explains that they are blackmailing John. And Jamie knows that as long as the Duke hasn't arrived, that means that John must still be alive. Claire also points out the signature and then is able to connect Percy to John's disappearance. So they find Percy, and we see William angrily attacking him, asking him where John is, and pushing him into the wall until he is able to confess that Richardson is behind everything. He doesn't know where John is because they traveled by boat and he was blindfolded, but he gives William the ring from John's hand, and Jamie snatches it out of his hand and looks for a message or clue, and inside he finds that John has scratched the word Pharos inside, which Jamie knows is lighthouse in Greek. They deduce that there is a lighthouse on Tybee Island, and in the book, William and Amaranthus are getting ready to head out to find information about the boat that Lord John could have been held captive on when they see Percy laying on the floor in the parlor where they had originally been talking, and he's curled up and heaving and retching his brains out because he ended up drinking a poisoned bottle of brandy that was at Lord John's house. And there's actually a passage from the unreleased book 10 that Diana has shared on her blog where Jamie and William are talking about where they can find Lord John, and William mentions how Percy had died in Lord John's house. And so the book makes his death seem very accidental. In the show, Jamie, Claire, and William all leave to go find John, but before they head out, William threatens Percy that there will be nowhere safe for him if they cannot find John or if they find him dead. William, Jamie, and Claire then row out to an island and spot a boathouse, and they see someone who William can tell is Captain Richardson. So they wait him out, watching him fish, And while John sits in his cell with the two men guarding over it, Jamie and William emerge from the water and team up to take the two men out while Claire keeps an eye on Richardson. And once she can tell that he's done fishing, we actually hear her curse for one of the few times in the show because she knows that Jamie and William will be out of time soon. Jamie then breaks into John's cell and tells John he looks good with a beard, and John delivers this funny line that he's no oil painting himself, and the two of them reunite. We see William and John hug, and William return his ring to him, and it's a very emotional reunion where Jamie very fondly looks on, and Richardson is slowly making his way back towards the lighthouse with Claire cocking a gun on him. And he plays dumb and says he doesn't know why Claire is there and asks why she would be there. And she says on behalf of her former husband this time, not her current one. That's when she tells him she hasn't come alone and brings him to the boathouse where we see Jamie and William and John all mull over what to do with him. Jamie then sends William and John outside while he goes to take care of the boat, and that leaves Claire with Richardson, and the two of them speak about how they were able to find John through Percy Beauchamp. Richardson then tells Claire his plan, how he doesn't believe in American victory is indicative of freedom because of slavery, and his great-great-grandmother was a slave, and her name was Abilene Meadows. She had a child by the man who owned her. There, at the time of this story, is an abolitionist movement in England, and Richardson wants the enslaved people to be set free by the abolitionist law passing, because in America, slaves will not be free for 85 more years. And the revolution allows slavery to be run in America unchecked, and it leads to the Civil War. Claire tells him that she knows he is a time traveler and that she herself has traveled from 1945 and 1968, the first time being an accident and the second time not being an accident. And so Richardson thinks she is there to help him, and she must understand what he's trying to do. And so in his efforts to try and prevent slavery by preventing the American colonies from becoming free, he tells her he's pinpointed several people who will impact the war directly, and Hal Gray is the key. That's all the same as how it's written in the book. Claire then asks Richardson why he doesn't just kill Hal, and Richardson explains that if he were to kill him, someone else would still deliver Hal's original speech on his behalf. So instead, he needs Hal to be alive and give the speech that Richardson has written for him instead. And it would be one that convinces Britain to stay in the war, and John is the only leverage he has. Claire then tells him she understands his desire to change the course of history, but the war has already been lost. And in her admission, Richardson can tell that she's already tried to prevent a war and failed. So she tells him of Culloden and Alamance and how despite their efforts, what happened before always ends up happening. That she's not given up trying to change history or her own history, because she's taken lives and ruined lives, but she's also saved lives. And perhaps she's not there to change history, but simply be a part of it. And when she first went through the stones, it wasn't a choice. She didn't know if it was fate or destiny or God, but she felt like she was meant to be there, and she knows that this is her right time. And Richardson says he feels the same way and wonders what else their ability to time travel is for, if not to try and make the world a better place. And he wants to go and do what he believes is his part in history. And Claire gives into that and asks for his word that he won't harm anyone again, and lets him go try, which I think is very naive of her to believe that he wouldn't harm anyone, given that he kidnapped John. And, he gives Claire his word and she releases him, which I just don't see how Claire would do this, because at the very beginning of this season, she had absolutely no issues killing a man in the first scene of the season herself, but that she lets Richardson go. He walks out the door and John shoots him in the head. She says that for a moment she had seen in Richardson's eyes what she felt herself, which was a desperate belief that she could write a new chapter in Jamie's story, but that belief had died when Richardson died, and it reaffirmed to Claire that history writes itself, and she resolves to believe that her dream is foolish. Back at the house in Savannah, John returns with Claire and Jamie, and inside John thanks them both for rescuing him and saving his life and reputation. And for the sake of their history, Jamie could not let him die at the hands of Richardson. He forgives John for what happened and says that they never speak of it again. And I loved this scene because John does not forgive Jamie for his pig-headed treatment of him for the past 2 years. And I think that that's such a great indication of the strength of their relationship because they go toe-to-toe on everything. We see John storm off into the parlor, and Claire quotes the Bible at Jamie, saying, "Pride goeth before the fall." And Jamie very bitterly tells her not to quote the Bible at him, but Claire asks Jamie to tell her that he doesn't love that man, meaning John, and she will never say his name again. And Jamie's face is perfect here because we all know that he loves John, and she knows that he loves John. And so he goes into the parlor after John, and Claire leaves them to it. Inside, Jamie tells John that he already knows it's a Fraser family trait to be stubborn as a mule. His grandsire was said to have never apologized in his life, and he's referring to the old fox, which again, I think anytime he's being brought up in Outlander Season 8, it's a way to kind of weave this story into Blood of My Blood. That's when John clarifies that he was the one beheaded at Tower Hill, and Jamie confirms that. John then suggests that he could have been a bit more conciliatory, and this feels again like connective tissue being laid out between those two shows. Jamie then gets to the heart of the matter and explains that when Claire and John slept together, he knows they were both imagining him and that it was Jamie that John was reaching for, and that felt like a betrayal of their friendship to Jamie. John then clarifies that it was born out of grief, and he said what he said because he was trying to explain something that to him was impossible to explain, and he never meant for it to hurt Jamie. But Jamie then near beat him to death for it, and he might have if not for the soldiers coming up and putting an end to that fight. And if Jamie isn't able to forgive John after everything that they've been through and everything that John has ever done for their friendship, then he's resolved to believe that Jamie doesn't think there's a friendship there at all. Jamie is willing to admit that he wronged John after that, and he apologizes to him because his pride had been keeping him from seeing things clearly. And he knows that John has done more for him than he would ever be able to repay him for. He's been there in ways that no one else in Jamie's life has ever been. And he tells John that when William and John hugged at the boathouse, he was able to see their love for each other firsthand. Despite Jamie raising him until he was 6, they both know that John is the person who shaped William after that and made him into the man that he is. And Jamie recognizes what he had to sacrifice in order to do that. And I loved this line where John admits that he had sacrificed many things in his life, but raising William was never one of them. That William was the greatest gift of his life, and he thanks Jamie for entrusting him with him and allowing him to raise him. And Jamie thanks him back, but says that John deserves better and asks what more he can do. And I love this scene because we see John roll up his sleeves and say that his honor must be restored, and Jamie owes him a beating. And the two of them sit down to play chess across from one another, and they talk about how when they last played, Jamie thrashed him soundly. He would like to claim his revenge. And it's the most beautiful parallel to their friendship being born at Ardsmuir. And this scene personally was my favorite of the season thus far because I will forever love the friendship between these two men. And I know we will get something akin to this in book 10, but it was nice to get this show version of their reconciliation. Claire is out on the porch when William approaches her and asks if she's enjoying the quiet while his fathers talk. William admits he'll never get used to having two fathers. And I love this conversation because Claire tells him that he is like both of them in different ways and brings up how Bree has two fathers and Roger has two fathers and young Ian's son has two fathers and Claire technically has two fathers, because she only knew her real father, Henry, until she was 5 years old. So again, another name drop for Blood of My Blood. She hardly remembers him, but her uncle raised her, and everyone she knows was raised by a village, and they're all doing just fine. And while William feels like he is being tugged in two directions, Claire reminds him that both of the men who are father figures to him just want what's best for him, and they will fight for him with everything they have. And he wonders how he could love them both without betraying the other. I love this line that love isn't a betrayal but a gift, and William loving them for who they are, just as the same as they love him for who he is a gift. And William claims he doesn't know who he is. Claire tells him that all he has to be to them is their son. And I think that helps him come to terms with it. And I love the messaging here because I think it's easy to forget how many people in this story were raised by people who are not necessarily their true parents. And while William as a character can be so selfish, it's good for him to realize that his problems are not unique to him. And they only remain problems if he frames them that way. And so if he can look at this for the gift that it is and move forward knowing that he will be okay, just like everybody else around him in this storyline, it's all the better for having so many people love him. Amaranthus and William's storyline is closed out with a conversation where she admits that she is happy she got to meet his father, meaning Jamie, which again, that gets cut and takes place off camera. And the two of them talk about forgiveness. And William says he's learned it's seldom a single act. You have to keep doing it. And Amaranthus asks if he could ever forgive her. He says he understands why she did what she did for Trevor. And while months ago William saw things in black and white, he's able to see things now in shades of gray, which is, I love that pun given their last name. And so William is living in that gray area when she asks if he will reconsider their future. He's honest with her and says there is no future for them. He tells her he will not lie, and he doesn't love her, but he wishes her well and hopes that she is able to find love and happiness. And in the book, the last we see of her is in Lord John's house when Percy dies in the parlor. So her storyline has not yet been completed in the books. We see time passing, and then Jamie and Claire are getting ready to leave Savannah on horseback, and it's raining, and we see William and John looking out towards Jamie again, just like they are in season 4. And Jamie turns this time to look back at William and heals the wound from William's childhood and smiles at him before he and Claire continue on their way. And I love seeing John's smile in the background too. It just makes everything feel full circle. But this being the last shot we see of both John and William, it's so precious to me, but I wanted more given that the growth we saw take place between Jamie and William. I wanted a hug at least, or some sort of proper goodbye that we got to listen to, but at the very least, this visual callback to season 4 was its own kind of satisfaction. At the Ridge, they have brought in the harvest, and Claire counts the days remaining in the lead up to the Battle of Kings Mountain. We can see that Bree and Roger's third child, Davy, has been born, and Jamie's looking out at his daughter and new grandson before Bree comes inside and says that she's glad they got back in time to see the birth. So again, we didn't get to see that on screen. It's just another momentous moment in the storyline where we are told about it but don't actually get to see it. And we hear his full name, which is David William Ian Fraser Mackenzie. Bree asks Jamie what's going on with him, and this is when he tells her that he fights at Kings Mountain and that Frank wrote it in his book, and Bree can tell that he's not going to come back. And Jamie confirms that Frank wrote he will be killed there. Bree says that if this is what it says, then he shouldn't go. And again, I'm wondering how it's been years and Bree has never once thought to read this book. And in all the preparation for the battle that they all did collectively, Jamie did not once think to have this discussion with his own daughter, even though he was happy to have it with Roger multiple times and asking Roger to keep it from Brianna. It just seems like a plot hole that he wouldn't have told her before now. But he says to her, if Frank is right, then this battle could end the war in the back country, which Jamie sees as a worthwhile reason to fight because it means that Bree and his whole family will be safe. And Bree then tells him she fears losing him more than a pending war and begs him not to go and tells him that maybe Frank wrote this in the book so that he would stay home and not go. But Frank knew Jamie would protect Bree with his life, same as he would. And so Jamie knows that the only way to truly protect everyone he loves is to fight. In a show-only scene, we can see Percy being met by John at the solicitor's office in Savannah, and he sits across from him and puts a weapon on the desk. And in a very serious tone, he states that Percy has betrayed him, and for that he must answer. Percy then argues that he had no choice, and he didn't mean it, and Richardson threatened him and threatened to kill him. But John points out, yet here you are, alive and well. Richardson is dead. John says that thanks to him, Richardson is dead. So John presents Percy with a different option, where Percy admits that he was part of a ploy to frame him. he would be held at the hand of the courts. But if he refuses, John says that it can be his signature on that paper in blood. So either way, he will pay for his treachery. Percy quickly wraps the paper, and we see the date at the top as the 29th of August, 1780. Percy then asks what will happen if he signs the paper, and John tells him he will give it to the authorities, he will be arraigned, and justice will be served, and he'll likely live in prison until his death. And we can see Percy crying because he swears he never meant to hurt John. But John tells him, pretty void of emotion, to make his choice. And so we see Percy sign the paper, crying. John refolds it, puts his weapon away, stands to leave. And that's when Percy asks if he will ever be able to forgive him. And John simply walks away, leaving Percy to live with his actions. And so he basically tells Percy, no, for the rest of my life, I will never forgive you. And so when he walks outside and hears a gunshot, we know that Percy chose to end his own life. And John says, may God have mercy on your soul. So to me, this ending, which is different from the book, where Percy actually dies by ingesting poison accidentally, this frees John and his storyline up moving forward, should they choose to create a spin-off with John. Instead of doing a Lord John series where he was younger based on the novellas, they could do one from this point moving forward with him, and it kind of frees us up from the whole Percy storyline as well. Back at the big house, Claire is writing in their bedroom when Jamie comes in and asks what she's doing up there in the middle of the day, and points out she's not writing in a medical journal, and asks what she's writing about. And initially she hides it from him, but Jamie ends up prying it away from her and begins to read the opening of the first book, Outlander, that we hear her saying in the first episode of the series. And Jamie calls it a hell of a beginning and asks if she's writing her story. And Claire clarifies that no, she's writing their story, which is important information when considering the finale of the series, because if the book is not yet completed, which I noted how thick the journal is in this scene, because I don't think Claire has written everything yet. It's important foreshadowing to how that little journal is presented in the finale. Outside the house, we hear Cleveland call out for Jamie, and he approaches with his men and says that Ferguson is on the march to North Carolina, and tells Jamie that the time has come. They will muster with the rest of the Overmountain men at Sycamore Shoals, which is a real-life location in North Carolina, in 2 days' time. And in the book, Jamie actually receives a letter from John Sevier telling him to meet him on the 25th of September in place of this. So they just swap that out with Cleveland here. And we know Jamie owes Cleveland because he said so himself. And we hear Claire's voice over again saying that Cleveland's words echoed across the ridge. The battle she had so dreaded now cast its shadow before them. And though she had conquered time itself, she stood powerless as it marched her beloved towards a fate she could not change.